The dust from the trail still clung to Penelope Porter's skirts when she knocked on Flynn Harrison's door, her knuckles raw and trembling against the weathered wood of his ranch house in Florissant, Colorado. Though knocking felt like too gentle a word for the desperate rhythm her fist made in the fading August light of 1883. She had walked 7 miles from town with nothing but the clothes on her back and shame burning hotter than the summer sun that had beaten down on her all afternoon. And now here she stood, swallowing every ounce of pride she had left as the door swung open to reveal the man she had rejected 3 years ago. Flynn stood there in his work shirt and dusty trousers, his dark hair falling across his forehead, those storm-gray eyes widening when he recognized her. He was 26 now, 3 years older than when she had laughed at his proposal and told him she was meant for better things than a struggling cattle rancher. He had filled out since then, his shoulders broader from years of hard labor, his jaw harder from rejection and time. "Penelope," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips nearly broke her. "Please." The word came out strangled, and she hated how weak it sounded, how desperate. "Flynn, I need your help. I have nowhere else to go. My father's dead, the ranch is gone, everything is gone, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did, but I am begging you. Please, just let me stay here for a few days until I can figure out what to do next. I will work for my keep. I will do anything. I just need—" "Stop." His voice cut through her rambling plea, firm but not unkind. He stepped back from the doorway, holding the door wider. "You never have to beg here. Come inside." The simple kindness of those words, after everything she had been through in the past month, shattered something inside her. Penelope felt tears burn hot, trails down her dusty cheeks, as she stepped over the threshold into Flynn Harrison's home, into the life she could have had if she had not been so foolish and proud. The interior of the ranch house was cleaner than she expected, with simple furniture and curtains on the windows that looked hand-sewn. Flynn guided her to a chair at the kitchen table and went to pump water into a basin, bringing it to her with a clean cloth. "Wash your face," he said quietly. "Then you can tell me what happened." Penelope took the cloth with shaking hands, pressing the cool dampness against her burning skin. The water turned gray with dust as she cleaned away the evidence of her long walk. Flynn moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the stove and putting a kettle on for coffee. He did not push her to speak, did not demand explanations, just let her gather herself in the quiet comfort of his home. When she finally found her voice again, the words came slowly at first, then faster as the whole terrible story poured out. Her father, George Porter, had made bad investments in a silver mine that never produced. He had borrowed money from everyone in Florissant who would lend it, including the banker Samuel Hutchins, who had been patient at first but grew demanding as the debts mounted. When her father could not pay, Hutchins had offered a solution that made Penelope's stomach turn even now. "He said he would forgive all the debts if I married him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Samuel Hutchins is 53 years old. He has buried 2 wives already. My father actually considered it. He sat me down and told me it was the only way to save our family's honor, to keep the ranch." Flynn's hands tightened around his coffee cup, but he said nothing, just listened. "I refused. I told my father I would rather work as a laundress in Denver than marry that man. We fought, terrible things were said. He told me I had always been too proud for my own good, that I had already thrown away one good man with my foolish ideas." She looked up at Flynn then, meeting his eyes. "He meant you." "What happened to your father?" Flynn asked. "His heart gave out 2 weeks ago. The doctor said the stress and worry had weakened it. He died in his sleep, and maybe that was a mercy because he did not have to see what came next. Hutchins foreclosed on the ranch immediately. Everything was sold at auction to pay the debts. I had nowhere to go, no family left. My mother's sister lives in St. Louis, but I do not have the money for train fare, and even if I did, I could not stomach showing up on her doorstep as a charity case. "So you came here," Flynn said. "So I came here." Penelope set down the cloth and looked at him directly. "I know what I did to you, Flynn. I know I do not deserve your kindness. When you asked me to marry you, I laughed in your face and told you I was going to marry someone important, someone with prospects. I was cruel and stupid, and I have regretted it every day since." Flynn was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he stood and refilled both their coffee cups. "You can stay in the spare room for as long as you need. Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch and we can figure out what work needs doing. I have been managing on my own, but there is always more than one person can handle." "Thank you," Penelope whispered. "I will earn my keep, I promise." "I know you will." Flynn's expression softened slightly. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you where you will be sleeping." He led her down a short hallway to a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed covered in a simple quilt. There was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the pastures where she could see cattle grazing in the last of the daylight. "I will bring you some water for washing and find you a clean shirt to sleep in," Flynn said. "Are you hungry?" "I can make something." Penelope realized she had not eaten since early morning, but her stomach was still tight with anxiety and shame. "Maybe just some bread, if you have it." He nodded and left her alone. Penelope sank down onto the bed and let herself truly feel the weight of what had happened. A month ago, she had been Penelope Porter, daughter of a ranch owner with prospects and pride. Now she was homeless, penniless, dependent on the charity of a man she had wounded deeply with her rejection. The irony was not lost on her. But beneath the shame and exhaustion, there was also a strange sense of relief. Flynn had not turned her away. He had not thrown her mistakes in her face or demanded groveling apologies. He had simply opened his door and offered shelter, no strings attached. That simple generosity meant more than he could possibly know. Flynn returned with a pitcher of clean water, a slice of bread with butter, and one of his own shirts, which would be enormous on her but would serve for sleeping. He set everything on the chest of drawers and paused in the doorway. "Penelope," he said, "what you did 3 years ago, that is in the past. You do not owe me apologies or explanations beyond what you have already given. We all make mistakes when we are young. What matters now is moving forward." "You are kinder than I deserve," she said. "Maybe kindness is not about deserving." He gave her a small, sad smile. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day." After he left, Penelope changed into the borrowed shirt, which hung past her knees and smelled faintly of soap and sun-dried cotton. She ate the bread slowly, savoring each bite, then washed her face and hands more thoroughly in the basin. When she finally lay down on the bed, her body ached from the long walk and the emotional toll of the day, but her mind would not settle. She thought about Flynn as he had been 3 years ago, young and earnest and full of hope when he had asked her to marry him. He had been 23 then, just starting to build his ranch into something successful. She had been 20, beautiful and sought after, convinced that her looks and charm would land her a wealthy husband from Denver or even further east. She had not wanted to be a rancher's wife, dealing with hard work and uncertain futures. She had wanted ease and luxury, and a life that required nothing of her but being ornamental. How foolish she had been. How blind to what truly mattered. Sleep claimed her eventually, deep and dreamless from exhaustion. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and with it the reality of her situation. She dressed quickly in her wrinkled, dusty dress from yesterday, the only clothes she owned now, and made her way to the kitchen. Flynn was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same efficient movements he had shown the night before. He glanced over when she entered. "Morning. Hope you are hungry. I made extra." "I am." Penelope hesitated, then moved to the table. "Can I help with anything? Just sit. It is almost ready." He served her a plate heaped with bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes, along with fresh coffee. The food was simple but good, cooked by someone who knew his way around a kitchen through necessity rather than training. "This is delicious," Penelope said after the first few bites. "You learn to cook when you live alone." Flynn sat down across from her with his own plate. "After breakfast, I thought I would show you around the property, let you get familiar with how things work here. The cattle mostly take care of themselves this time of year, grazing in the high pastures, but there is plenty of other work. I have chickens that need tending, a vegetable garden that has gotten away from me, mending and washing that piles up faster than I can handle it." "I can do all of that," Penelope said quickly. "I am a good cook, and I know how to sew and manage a household. My mother taught me before she passed." Flynn nodded. "I remember your mother. She was a kind woman." They finished breakfast in companionable silence, then Flynn led her outside to show her the ranch. In the 3 years since she had last seen his property, he had made significant improvements. The fences were well maintained, the barn solid and freshly painted. He had expanded his herd from the modest 40 head he had started with to nearly 200 cattle, along with several horses, the chickens he had mentioned, and even a few pigs. "You have done well for yourself," Penelope said as they walked the perimeter of the main yard. "This is a successful operation. It has been good to me." There was no bitterness in his voice, no suggestion that he was thinking about what she had said 3 years ago about his lack of prospects. He simply stated a fact. The chickens were housed in a well-built coop behind the barn. Flynn showed her how he fed them and collected eggs, where he stored the feed, and which hens were the best layers. The vegetable garden was indeed overgrown, weeds threatening to choke out the tomatoes, beans, and squash, but the plants themselves were healthy enough. "I just have not had time to keep up with it," Flynn admitted. "Between the cattle and maintaining everything else, the garden gets neglected." "I will take care of it," Penelope promised. "By the end of the week, it will be producing properly again." They spent the rest of the morning working together. Flynn showed her where he kept his tools, how he organized the barn, the routine he followed for daily chores. Penelope absorbed it all, determined to make herself useful, to justify the kindness he had shown her. By midday, they were both hungry and dusty. Flynn suggested they break for lunch, and Penelope insisted on preparing it. She made sandwiches from the bread and leftover bacon, added some of the canned vegetables Flynn had stored in his cellar, and they ate on the porch in the shade. "I have been thinking," Flynn said as they finished eating. "You mentioned needing train fare to St. Louis eventually. If you work here through the fall, helping with the harvest and the preparations for winter, I can pay you a fair wage. By November, you should have enough saved for the ticket and some money to start fresh with your aunt." Penelope felt something twist in her chest at the thought of leaving, which was absurd. She had been here less than a day. But the idea of going to St. Louis, living with an aunt she barely knew in a crowded city, felt wrong somehow. Still, she could not impose on Flynn's generosity indefinitely. "That is more than fair," she said quietly. "Thank you." The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Penelope woke early, made breakfast for both of them, then spent her mornings working in the garden and tending the chickens while Flynn dealt with the cattle and horses. Afternoons they often worked together on larger projects, mending fences, organizing the barn, preserving food for winter. Evenings they shared simple dinners, then sat on the porch as the sun set, talking about small things, the weather, the neighbors in town, nothing too personal or painful. Penelope found herself settling into the routine with surprising ease. The work was hard, her hands developing calluses and her muscles aching at first, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. She liked seeing the tangible results of her labor, the tidy rows of vegetables, the eggs collected each morning, the clean house and mended clothes. After years of being ornamental, of focusing on her appearance and social graces, there was freedom in doing real work that mattered. And she liked being around Flynn. He was quiet but not cold, steady in a way that made her feel safe. He never pushed her to talk about painful subjects, never made her feel like a burden. When she made mistakes, as she inevitably did while learning new tasks, he corrected her gently and showed her the right way without making her feel foolish. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, and she wondered what he was thinking. Did he still have feelings for her, or had her rejection 3 years ago killed whatever he had felt? Did he see her as a temporary worker, someone who would leave when she had saved enough money? Or was there something else there, some possibility neither of them had voiced? 3 weeks after her arrival, they were working together in the barn, organizing the hay that would feed the livestock through winter. It was hot work despite the September coolness outside, and they were both sweating and covered in chaff by the time they finished. "I think that deserves a break," Flynn said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her behind the barn and up a trail that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines. The scent of the trees was sharp and clean, and the shade was blissfully cool after the heat of the barn. They climbed for about 10 minutes before the trail opened onto a small meadow with a view that took Penelope's breath away. Below them, the ranch spread out in a patchwork of pastures and fields, the cattle mere dots in the distance. Beyond that, the town of Florissant was visible, small and neat. And in the far distance, mountains rose against the blue sky, their peaks still holding snow even in early fall. "I come up here when I need to think," Flynn said, settling onto a flat rock at the edge of the meadow. "It helps to see the bigger picture sometimes, remember what I am working toward." Penelope sat beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "It is beautiful." "I had forgotten how beautiful this country is." "You were always looking beyond it," Flynn said quietly. "Looking for something else somewhere else. I was a fool." The words came easily now, worn smooth by repetition in her own mind. "I thought I wanted excitement and status, but I did not understand what I was giving up to chase those things." Flynn was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at her. "What do you want now, Penelope? Truly?" She met his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams more often than she cared to admit over the past 3 years. "Honestly, I do not know anymore. A month ago, I thought I knew what my life would be. Now, everything has changed, and I am still trying to figure out who I am without all the things I thought defined me." "You are stronger than you think," Flynn said. "The woman who showed up on my doorstep 3 weeks ago was desperate and scared, but she was also brave. It takes courage to ask for help, and the work you have done here, you have thrown yourself into it without complaint. That takes character." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the September sun. "I am just trying to earn my keep. You have done more than that. This place feels different with you here. Better." He looked away then, out over the vista before them. "I told myself I was over you, Penelope. After you turned me down, I worked hard to forget. I went to dances in town, courted other women, tried to move on, but none of them were you." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Flynn, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I do not expect anything from you. You came here for shelter, and I gave it freely with no strings attached. But I would be lying if I said having you here has not stirred up old feelings. I look at you every day, working beside me, laughing at something the chickens did, and I remember why I fell in love with you in the first place. You are beautiful, yes, but you are also smart and capable and stronger than you give yourself credit for." Penelope's throat tightened with emotion. "I do not deserve your affection, not after how I treated you. Maybe not. But love is not always about deserving, is it? It just is." He stood then, offering his hand to help her up. "Come on, we should head back. I have to check the north fence before dark." She took his hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers, and let him pull her to her feet. For a moment they stood close, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that she could smell the hay and sweat and something essentially him. Then Flynn stepped back, releasing her hand, and the moment passed. They walked back to the ranch in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Penelope's mind raced with everything Flynn had said. He still had feelings for her. After everything she had done, after all the time that had passed, he still cared. The knowledge filled her with a confusing mixture of joy and fear. Did she feel the same way? She cared for him, certainly. She was grateful to him, absolutely. But was it love? Or was it just the natural affection that grew from working closely with someone kind and attractive? She did not trust her own feelings right now. Everything was too confused, too raw. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Penelope found the courage to address what Flynn had said. "Earlier today, when you talked about your feelings," she began, her voice tentative, "I need you to know that I am honored by them, truly. But I am also confused about my own heart right now. I care for you, Flynn. Being here with you these past weeks has been good, better than I expected. But I do not know if what I feel is real affection or just gratitude mixed with old guilt." Flynn nodded slowly. "That is fair and honest. I appreciate that. I do not want to hurt you again," she continued. "You have been nothing but kind to me, and I would rather cut off my own hand than repay that kindness with more pain." "Then we will take it slow," Flynn said. "No rushing, no pressure. We will work together, live our lives, and see what happens naturally. If your feelings develop into something more, good. If they do not, well, at least we will part as friends this time instead of with harsh words." "Friends," Penelope repeated, trying out the word. "I would like that." Over the next several weeks their friendship deepened. They worked together during the days and spent their evenings talking about everything and nothing. Flynn told her about growing up the son of a blacksmith, learning the trade but dreaming of open spaces and his own land. He had saved every penny for 5 years before buying this property, starting with just the house and barn and 40 acres, then gradually expanding as the cattle business proved profitable. Penelope shared stories of her own childhood, her mother's gentle wisdom, her father's gradual descent into desperation as his investments failed. She talked about the loneliness of being an only child in a house where love was overshadowed by financial worry, how she had clung to dreams of escape because reality was too heavy to bear. "I think that is why I was so cruel when you proposed," she admitted one evening in late September as they sat by the fire. The nights were getting cold now, frost threatening the last of the garden vegetables. "You represented everything I was trying to run from. The hard work, the uncertainty, the very real possibility of failure. I wanted guarantees, Flynn. I wanted someone who could promise me that I would never have to worry or struggle." "There are no guarantees in this life," Flynn said softly. Rich men lose their fortunes. Poor men build empires. All we can do is work hard and hope for the best. I know that now. Penelope stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker. I wish I had known it then. You were young. We both were. You were wise beyond your years, apparently. She smiled at him. You knew what you wanted and went after it. I just flailed around chasing fantasies. I had moments of doubt too, Flynn admitted. There were nights after you rejected me when I wondered if I was crazy to think I could make this work. Maybe you were right to turn me down. Maybe I was just a dreamer with a patch of dirt and hope. But you did make it work. This ranch is thriving. Because I had no choice. After you said no, I poured all my hurt and anger into building something that would prove I was worth more than you thought. I worked sunrise to sunset, took on jobs in town during the winter when ranch work was slow, saved every penny. Some of it was pride, I will admit. I wanted you to see what you had rejected and regret it. Penelope felt a pang at his honesty. Did it help? Did building all this take away the hurt? Flynn considered this. Eventually, the work helped, keeping busy helped, and time helped most of all. By last year, I could see you in town without my chest tightening. I could hear your name without feeling angry. I thought I had moved on completely. He looked at her then, his expression tender. And then you showed up on my doorstep and I realized I had been fooling myself. I am sorry, Penelope whispered. For all of it, I know you are. And I have forgiven you, Penelope. I forgave you a long time ago, honestly. I was just too proud to admit it. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. He laced his fingers through hers, and they sat like that, hand in hand, watching the fire burn low until it was time for bed. October brought the first real snow, just a dusting that melted by noon, but a reminder that winter was coming. They worked together to prepare, bringing the cattle down from the high pastures to the lower fields where they could be monitored more easily, chopping and stacking wood for the stove, preserving the last of the garden vegetables, reinforcing the barn against winter winds. Penelope had never worked so hard in her life, but she had also never felt more satisfied. There was something deeply fulfilling about laying in supplies, knowing they had prepared well for the cold months ahead. And there was Flynn, always steady, always patient, teaching her the rhythms of ranch life with infinite care. She found herself watching him more and more, noticing small things. The way he was gentle with the horses, talking to them in a low voice as he brushed them down. The way he always made sure she got the first cup of coffee in the morning. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The way her heart lifted when he walked into a room. It was early November, a bitter cold day with wind whipping down from the mountains, when Penelope finally admitted to herself that she had fallen in love with Flynn Harrison. They were in the barn, checking on a cow that seemed ready to calve. Flynn was speaking softly to the animal, his hands gentle as he examined her. Penelope stood nearby with a lantern, providing light, and she watched him work with such care and competence that her chest ached with affection. This was not the shallow infatuation she had felt for other men, the flutter of attraction based on looks or status. This was something deeper, built on respect and friendship and shared labor. She loved his kindness and his strength. She loved how he had taken her in without hesitation, how he had never once made her feel less than worthy despite her past mistakes. She loved the life they had built together over these past 3 months, the easy companionship and the quiet satisfaction of good work done. She loved him simply and completely. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home. "Flynn," she said softly. He looked up from the cow, his expression concerned. "Everything all right? I need to tell you something." Penelope set the lantern down carefully on a post. These past months working with you, living here, I have been trying to sort out my feelings. You told me you still cared for me, and I said I needed time to figure out what I felt." Flynn straightened, his full attention on her now. "And have you figured it out?" "Yes." She stepped closer to him, her heart hammering. "I love you, Flynn. Not because you took me in or because I am grateful, though I am those things too. I love you because you are good and kind and strong. I love the way you care for your animals. I love how you make me laugh. I love working beside you and talking with you and just being near you. I was a fool 3 years ago to reject you, and I know I do not deserve a second chance, but I am hoping you might give me one anyway." For a long moment, Flynn just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him from handsome to radiant. "Penelope Porter," he said, closing the distance between them. "I have waited 3 years to hear you say that." He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, and Penelope felt like she was finally, truly home. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, but when she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of years of longing and newly acknowledged love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because you need shelter or because you feel obligated, but because you love me and I love you and I cannot imagine my life without you anymore." "Yes," Penelope said without hesitation. "Yes, Flynn, I will marry you." He kissed her again, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite the confined space of the barn. She laughed against his lips, giddy with joy and relief and love. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Florissant, with half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple dress that Flynn had surprised her with, buying the fabric in town, and having the seamstress make it up in cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was not the elaborate wedding gown she had once imagined for herself, but it was perfect. Flynn wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining as he watched her walk down the aisle toward him. There was no one to give her away, her father gone and no other family present, but she did not need anyone. She walked to Flynn of her own free will, her own choice, and that was what mattered. The reverend performed a simple ceremony, the traditional vows exchanged with hands clasped and eyes locked on each other. When Flynn kissed her as his wife, Penelope felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. The townspeople who had once whispered about her pride and her fall from grace now smiled and wished them well. Penelope knew there would always be gossip, but she found she did not care. Let them talk. She had found something more valuable than reputation or status. She had found love. They held a small reception at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and good wishes. Someone had a fiddle, and there was dancing in the cleared space of the barn. Flynn held Penelope close as they swayed to the music, his hand warm on her waist. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." When the last guests finally left and they were alone, Flynn carried Penelope over the threshold of their home, setting her down gently in the bedroom that was now truly theirs. "I love you," he said, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "I have loved you since the first time I saw you at the church social 5 years ago, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Penelope whispered, reaching up to pull him down into a kiss. "And I promise I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of that love." "You already have," Flynn said softly. "You already have." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people who had found their way to each other despite mistakes and pride and the passage of painful years. When Penelope finally fell asleep in Flynn's arms, she felt a peace she had never known before. The winter of 1883 was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold that lasted well into March. But inside the ranch house, Penelope and Flynn built a warm cocoon of domestic happiness. They worked together through the short days, caring for the livestock, maintaining the equipment, planning for spring. In the evenings, they read together by the fire or played cards or simply talked about their dreams for the future. Penelope proved to be an excellent ranch wife, managing the household with the same efficiency she had shown during her trial period. She learned to bake bread that rose perfectly, to churn butter, to preserve meat and vegetables so they would last through the lean months. Flynn taught her to shoot, insisting she needed to know how to defend herself and the ranch if he was ever away. "Not that I plan to leave you alone often," he said as they practiced with targets set up behind the barn. "But a ranch woman needs to be self-sufficient." Penelope took to shooting with the same determination she brought to everything else, practicing until she could hit the target more often than not. Flynn praised her progress, and she glowed under his approval. In late March, as the snow finally began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she attributed it to stress or the changes in her life. But when another month passed with no sign, she began to suspect the truth. She told Flynn one evening after supper, nervous despite knowing he would be pleased. They had talked about wanting children, but she had not expected it to happen quite so quickly. "I think I might be with child," she said, watching his face carefully. Flynn's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Penelope's nervousness evaporated. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Truly, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." "A baby," Flynn said wonderingly. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though the answer was clear on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Flynn said. He kissed her softly. "You have given me everything, Penelope. A home that feels complete, love I never thought I would have, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The doctor in Florissant confirmed the pregnancy in early April. Penelope was healthy and strong, he said, and the baby should arrive sometime in early October. Flynn treated her like spun glass after that, insisting she rest more and avoid heavy work. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Penelope protested. "I can still do my chores." "I know you can," Flynn said, "but I want to take care of you, let me." So Penelope focused on lighter tasks, tending the chickens, working in the garden once the ground thawed, sewing baby clothes from soft fabric Flynn bought in town. Her body changed gradually, her waist thickening and then disappearing entirely as the baby grew. Flynn told her she was beautiful every single day, and the way he looked at her, with such love and reverence, made her believe it. Summer brought long days of hard work as they prepared for the baby's arrival. Flynn built a cradle from oak, sanding it smooth and carving a simple pattern of flowers along the sides. Penelope sewed quilts and gowns and knitted tiny booties. The spare room became a nursery, painted and furnished with care. Neighbors visited throughout the summer, bringing gifts and advice. The women of Florissant, who had once looked down on Penelope for her pride, now welcomed her into their circle as Flynn's wife and a mother-to-be. Penelope attended quilting bees and church socials, making friends and building the kind of community connections she had once dismissed as beneath her. "I was so stupid," she told Flynn one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I thought small-town life would be boring and limiting, but there is so much richness here, so much genuine connection." These people care about each other in a way I never experienced in my social climbing days. People are people everywhere, Flynn said wisely. But I do think there is something special about a community like this where we all depend on each other. When someone is in trouble, we all pitch in. When there is joy, we all celebrate together. Penelope rested her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. I want our child to grow up knowing this. Real community, real values, real work that matters. They will, Flynn promised, covering her hand with his own. We will make sure of it. Labor began on a crisp October morning, just as the doctor had predicted. Flynn rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife, then paced the kitchen while Penelope labored in their bedroom with two neighbor women attending her. The birth was long and difficult, lasting well into the evening. Flynn wore a path in the kitchen floor with his pacing, starting at every sound from the bedroom, his face gray with worry. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily, one of the neighbor women came out with a huge smile. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is tired but well." Flynn rushed into the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the quilts she had made. The baby's face was red and scrunched, his eyes squeezed shut as he wailed his displeasure at being born. "Meet your son," Penelope said softly, tears streaming down her face. Flynn sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny person they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were blue-gray like Flynn's. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with his finger. The baby's fingers wrapped around Flynn's, gripping with surprising strength. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one definitively. Flynn looked at his son, then at his wife, then back at the baby. "James," he said. "After my father, James Harrison." "James," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Flynn Harrison, so he has your name too." "James Flynn Harrison," Flynn agreed. He leaned over carefully and kissed Penelope's forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything. I love you so much." "I love you too," Penelope said. "Both of you." The midwife and neighbor women left them alone once they were sure Penelope and the baby were settled. Flynn sat with his new family long into the night, watching James sleep, marveling at every tiny detail. The baby's miniature fingernails, the way his mouth worked even in sleep, the soft baby sounds he made. "I will give you everything," Flynn promised his sleeping son. "A good home, a good life, love and security. You will never doubt that you are wanted." Penelope smiled, her eyes drifting closed with exhaustion. "He already has all of that. Look at him, Flynn. He is surrounded by love." The first months of James's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant care, but Penelope and Flynn navigated them together with patience and humor. Flynn took on more of the household chores so Penelope could focus on nursing and caring for the baby. When James cried in the night, Flynn would bring him to Penelope for feeding, then walk the floor with him afterward, singing off key lullabies until the baby settled. Winter came again, their second as a married couple, and the house that had felt cozy with just the two of them now felt absolutely perfect with three. James grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, alert baby who smiled and cooed at his parents. Flynn was completely besotted, spending every free moment playing with his son. "You have created a monster," Penelope teased one evening, watching Flynn make ridiculous faces to earn James's giggles. "He is going to be so spoiled." "Children need to know they are loved," Flynn said, tickling James's belly and earning another peal of laughter. "Besides, how can I resist this face?" "You cannot," Penelope agreed, her heart full to bursting. "Neither can I." As James approached his first birthday in the fall of 1884, Penelope realized she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less joyous. Flynn was thrilled at the prospect of another child, though he worried about Penelope managing two babies so close together. "We will figure it out," Penelope assured him. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Besides, I have you to help me, and that makes all the difference." Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after both their mothers, arrived in May of 1885. She was smaller than James had been, with fine blonde hair and eyes that would eventually settle into a warm brown. James, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly. "Gentle," Penelope reminded him again and again as James patted Margaret's head with somewhat clumsy affection. "Baby sister is very small and delicate." Flynn built an addition onto the house that summer, creating more bedroom space now that their family was growing. He also hired a young man from town, Peter Lawson, to help with the ranch work, acknowledging that he could not manage everything alone now that he had a wife and two small children to consider. Peter was 22, hardworking and eager to learn. He lodged in the renovated bunkhouse and took his meals with the family, becoming almost like another brother to Flynn. The extra help meant Flynn had more time to spend with Penelope and the children, and the ranch continued to prosper under their combined efforts. The years flowed past in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning ranch work almost before he could walk properly. Margaret was gentler, preferring to stay close to her mother, helping in the garden and with the chickens. In 1887, Penelope gave birth to another son, Samuel, named for Flynn's grandfather. Samuel was the quietest of their children, content to observe rather than demand attention. In 1889, twin daughters arrived, Emily and Grace, throwing the household into cheerful chaos. Flynn and Penelope navigated parenthood with the same teamwork they brought to everything else. There were hard moments, of course, sleepless nights, childhood illnesses, the constant work of feeding and clothing and educating 5 children. But there was also immense joy. The sound of children's laughter filling the house, the pride of watching them grow and learn, the deep satisfaction of building a legacy together. The ranch continued to thrive. With Peter's help and eventually the assistance of the older children as they grew, the operation expanded significantly. They added sheep to the cattle, diversified into horses for sale to the army and private buyers, even tried their hand at some cash crops in the lower fields. Penelope became a respected member of the Florissant community, known for her kindness and practical wisdom. Women came to her for advice on everything from cooking to child rearing to managing household finances. She organized charity drives for families in need and taught Sunday school at the church. Flynn served on the town council and helped organize community events. He was known as a fair man, honest in his dealings, generous with his time and knowledge. Young ranchers just starting out often came to him for advice, and he helped them as freely as he had been helped in his own early days. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1893, Flynn surprised Penelope with a trip to Denver. Peter and his new wife agreed to watch the children for 3 days, and Flynn and Penelope took the train to the city for a second honeymoon of sorts. It was Penelope's first time back in Denver since she was a young woman dreaming of a glamorous life there. Walking the streets with Flynn, staying in a nice hotel, dining in restaurants, she felt none of the old longing for city life. Instead, she found herself comparing everything unfavorably to their ranch. "Too noisy," she complained after a restless first night. "Too crowded. How do people live like this all the time? Flynn laughed and pulled her close. I was wondering if you might feel differently seeing all this again. Part of me worried you would remember your old dreams. My dreams came true, Penelope said simply. Just not in the way I expected. I have everything I ever wanted, Flynn. You, our children, our home, our life together. This, she gestured at the city around them, is pretty to visit, but it is not home. No, Flynn agreed, kissing the top of her head. Home is waiting for us back in Florissant. They enjoyed the rest of their trip, seeing the sights and enjoying time alone together, something rare with 5 children at home. But they were both happy to board the train back to Florissant, and even happier when they arrived at the ranch to find all 5 children waiting on the porch, shouting and waving as the wagon pulled up. Penelope and Flynn climbed down and were immediately swarmed by small bodies, everyone talking at once, sharing everything that had happened in their 3-day absence. Flynn scooped up the twins, one in each arm, while James and Samuel grabbed their father around the waist. Margaret hugged her mother tightly. "Missed you," she said simply. "Missed you too, sweetheart," Penelope replied, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. "All of you." That evening, after the children were finally asleep, and Peter and his wife had returned to their own home, Penelope and Flynn sat on the porch in their favorite chairs, holding hands and looking out over the ranch that had become so much more than either of them had imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" Penelope asked quietly. "Taking me in that day when I showed up desperate on your doorstep. Your life would have been much simpler without me." Flynn turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Simpler maybe, but empty. Penelope, you are my heart. You and our children are everything that matters to me. Every day I wake up grateful that you came back into my life, that you gave us a second chance." "I am the grateful one," Penelope insisted. "You saved me, Flynn, not just from being homeless and alone, but from myself. From my own pride and foolishness. You showed me what really matters in life." "We saved each other," Flynn said. "That is what love does. It makes us better than we could be alone." Penelope stood and moved to sit on Flynn's lap, something she had not done since before the children came. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," she said. "More than I did 10 years ago, more than I did yesterday. My love for you just keeps growing." "Good," Flynn murmured against her hair. "Because I plan to keep you for at least another 50 years, and it would be inconvenient if you stopped loving me halfway through." Penelope laughed, the sound soft in the quiet night. 50 years sounds perfect. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. James, at 16, was already as tall as his father and indispensable on the ranch. He had Flynn's steady nature and good sense with animals. Margaret, at 14, had grown into a capable young woman who helped her mother manage the household with increasing independence. Samuel, at 12, was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a teacher. The twins, at 9, were still young enough to be mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes with their boundless energy. Flynn's hair had started to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Penelope, at 42, still looked remarkably like the woman who had knocked on Flynn's door 15 years earlier, though her hands bore the marks of hard work, and her face held the contentment of a life well lived. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. There had been drought years when the cattle struggled, and money was tight. There had been illnesses, a terrible bout of influenza that struck Margaret when she was 7 and had them terrified for weeks. There had been accidents, like when Samuel broke his arm falling from the barn loft, or when James was kicked by a horse and spent 3 days unconscious. But they had also celebrated countless joys. First steps and first words, school achievements, James's first successful cattle sale, Margaret's beautiful singing voice that led the church choir, Samuel winning a regional spelling competition, the twins learning to ride. In 1898, as the new year dawned, Penelope and Flynn sat together on their porch despite the January cold, bundled in blankets and watching the stars. 15 years, Penelope said wonderingly. 15 years since I married you. 20 since I first showed up here begging for help. Best decision I ever made, Flynn said. Letting you in, giving you a chance, falling in love with you all over again. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Penelope asked. When I was standing on your doorstep, humiliating myself. You never have to beg here, Flynn quoted. How could I forget? That was the moment I knew I was still completely in love with you, despite everything. I think that was the moment I started falling in love with you too, Penelope admitted. I did not recognize it then, but looking back, that simple kindness broke something open in my heart. You could have turned me away, could have thrown my rejection back in my face, but you did not. You just opened the door and let me in. I could never have turned you away, Flynn said. Not then, not ever. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence only possible between two people who knew each other completely. Finally, Penelope spoke again. I want to tell you something I have never said before. When I was young and foolish, turning down your proposal, I convinced myself I was making the right choice. But the truth is, even then, part of me knew I was making a terrible mistake. I cried myself to sleep that night and for many nights after. I just did not have the courage to admit I was wrong and come back to you. Flynn tightened his arm around her. What changed? What finally brought you to my door? Losing everything, Penelope said honestly. Losing my father, the ranch, my pride, all my illusions about what mattered. I had nowhere else to go, but even if I had, I think I would have chosen you. Because in my darkest moment, when I had lost everything else, I realized the only thing I truly wanted was you. I am glad you came, Flynn said simply. Whatever it took to bring you here, I am glad. So am I, Penelope said. Every single day I am glad. In the spring of 1899, James announced his intention to marry Sarah Mitchell, a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch. Flynn and Penelope approved wholeheartedly, and the wedding was planned for June. Watching her oldest son stand at the altar with his bride, Penelope felt the strange, bittersweet emotions of a mother seeing her child begin his own life. James looked so much like Flynn had at that age, tall and serious and full of hope. Sarah gazed at him with the kind of love Penelope recognized, complete and trusting. He is going to be fine, Flynn whispered, reaching for Penelope's hand. We raised him well. I know, Penelope whispered back, dabbing at her eyes. I just remember when he was so small, and now he is a man with a wife of his own. Time moves fast, Flynn agreed. Seems like yesterday you were walking down this same aisle toward me. Best walk I ever took, Penelope said, squeezing his hand. James and Sarah built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, and James continued working the land with his father. It was understood that eventually the ranch would pass to him, and he was learning everything he needed to know to run it successfully. Margaret, at 19, had attracted several suitors from town, but she seemed in no hurry to marry. She helped her mother with the younger children and the household, and she directed the church choir with grace and skill. I will marry when I find someone I love the way you and Pa love each other, she told Penelope one day as they worked in the garden together. Otherwise, I would rather stay single. That is wise, Penelope said approvingly. Never settle for less than real love, Margaret. Did you always love Pa? Margaret asked curiously. Or did you have to learn to love him? Penelope considered how to answer this. Her children knew the basic story of how their parents had met and married, but not all the painful details. I loved your father from the moment I truly saw him, she said finally. But it took me a long time to recognize that love for what it was. I was blinded by pride and foolish dreams. When I finally opened my eyes and my heart, there he was, patient and true. The lesson is not to wait as long as I did to recognize what matters. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. I hope I am wiser than that. You already are, Penelope assured her. In 1901, Flynn and Penelope celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a surprise party, inviting half the town to the ranch for a celebration. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, toasts to the happy couple who had built such a strong life together. Flynn pulled Penelope onto the makeshift dance floor in the barn, the same barn where they had danced at their wedding reception 20 years earlier. 20 years, he said as they swayed to the music, and I love you more now than I did then. I feel the same way, Penelope said. Thank you, Flynn, for everything, for taking me in, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for coming back to me, Flynn replied, for giving us a second chance, for being the best partner I could have asked for. They kissed to the applause and cheers of their family and friends, and Penelope felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt at 23, newly married and full of hope. The early 1900s brought changes. Samuel, at 18, left for Teachers College in Denver, though he promised to return to Florissant eventually to teach at the local school. The twins, now 16, were young ladies with their own interests and dreams. Emily wanted to be a nurse, while Grace talked of opening a bakery. James and Sarah had their first child in 1902, a daughter they named Penelope after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake for the first time, Penelope felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. She is beautiful, she told Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Absolutely beautiful. We hope she grows up to be like you, Sarah said shyly. Strong and kind and wise. Penelope laughed through her tears. I was not always those things, but I will try to be a good example for her now. Flynn was completely enchanted with his first grandchild, doting on little Penelope even more than he had doted on his own children. Penelope teased him about being soft, but secretly, she loved watching him with the baby. You are going to spoil her, she warned as Flynn rocked the baby and made silly faces. That is what grandparents are for, Flynn replied unrepentantly. In 1905, as Penelope and Flynn approached their 25th anniversary, they took stock of their life together with deep satisfaction. The ranch was thriving, managed jointly by Flynn and James with help from Peter, who had become like family over the years. Their children were all healthy and pursuing their dreams. Margaret had finally found her match in a kind schoolteacher named Thomas, and they planned to marry in the fall. Samuel was teaching in Denver but visited often. The twins had both found work that suited them. Emily training as a nurse and Grace apprenticing at the town bakery with plans to eventually take it over. And James and Sarah had given them 2 more grandchildren, a son named Flynn and another daughter named Rose. We did well, Flynn said one evening as they sat on their porch, now a ritual ingrained by 25 years of habit. Against all odds, we built something that will last beyond us. We did, Penelope agreed, and it started with you opening your door to a desperate woman who did not deserve your kindness. Stop that, Flynn said gently. You did deserve it. Everyone deserves kindness when they are in need. I just happened to be in the position to offer it. And I happened to be wise enough finally to accept it, Penelope said. though it took me long enough to get there. The timing was perfect, Flynn assured her. If you had come back sooner, we might not have been ready for each other. We both needed to grow and change to become the people who could build this life together. Maybe, Penelope allowed. I just wish I had not wasted 3 years being stubborn and proud. Flynn pulled her close, kissing her temple. Those 3 years made us appreciate what we have all the more. No regrets, Penelope. We have too much to be grateful for to waste time on regrets. Their 25th anniversary celebration was quieter than their 20th, just family gathered around the dinner table, sharing a meal and memories. The children, even the married ones and those working elsewhere, had all come home for the occasion. After dinner, James stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. What partnership and commitment and hard work can build. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from your example." The others echoed the toast, and Penelope found herself crying again, overwhelmed with gratitude for the family they had created. Later, alone in their bedroom, Flynn gave Penelope a small box wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said. 25 years deserve something special." Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain. Penelope opened it to find tiny photographs of Flynn and herself on one side and all 5 of their children on the other. "Flynn, it is beautiful," she breathed. "When did you have this made?" "I sent the photographs to a jeweler in Denver months ago," Flynn admitted. "I wanted you to have something that represented our family, everything we have built together." Penelope fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the pleasant weight of it against her chest. "I will never take it off," she promised. "Good," Flynn said, pulling her into his arms. "Because I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours forever." The years continued their steady march. Flynn and Penelope aged gracefully, their hair going gray, their faces lining with the years, but their love only deepening. They became the respected elders of Florissant, sought out for advice and wisdom, revered for the example of their enduring marriage. More grandchildren arrived over the years, filling the ranch with laughter during visits. Margaret and Thomas had 3 children. Samuel eventually married a fellow teacher and had 2. The twins both married and started families of their own. James and Sarah ended up with 6 children in total, a brood that kept the ranch house lively whenever they all gathered. In 1915, Flynn and Penelope celebrated their 35th anniversary. They were both in their 60s now, still active but slower than they had once been. James had officially taken over management of the ranch, though Flynn still helped with lighter tasks and offered guidance when asked. 35 years, Penelope marveled as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "More than half my life spent with you." "The best half," Flynn said. "Absolutely the best half," Penelope agreed. She still wore the locket Flynn had given her 10 years earlier, now complemented by other jewelry marking various anniversaries and special occasions, but the locket remained her favorite. "You remember that first night?" Flynn asked. "When you showed up desperate and I took you in?" "Every detail," Penelope said. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had lost everything. I had no idea I was actually standing at the beginning of my real life. I was so nervous," Flynn admitted. "I wanted to help you, but I also knew I still had feelings for you, and I did not know if you could ever return them. I was terrified I would end up hurt all over again." "Instead, we ended up here," Penelope said, gesturing at the ranch, the house, the life they had built. 35 years of love and partnership and family. "I would do it all again," Flynn said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it." "So would I," Penelope said softly. They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family James and Sarah visiting with some of the grandchildren, laughter and conversation drifting through the open windows. "We did good," Flynn said finally. "We did great," Penelope corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. As they sat together in the gathering twilight, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate day when she had swallowed her pride and begged for help, to this moment of peace and contentment surrounded by the family and life they had built together. She had learned so much over the years. That pride was worthless compared to love. That real wealth had nothing to do with money or status. That the best things in life came from hard work and commitment, and staying true to the people who mattered most. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the best thing that could happen was losing everything you thought you wanted, because it cleared the way for finding what you actually needed. Flynn had been right that very first day, all those years ago. She had never needed to beg here, in this place where she was cherished and valued and loved beyond measure. She had found her home, her partner, her purpose. The years that followed brought their inevitable changes. Children grew up and had children of their own. Friends passed away. New ones were made. The world changed around them as automobiles became common and electricity came to fluorescent, and the old frontier days faded into memory. But through it all, Flynn and Penelope remained constants for each other, their love a steady anchor in changing times. They celebrated 40 years together, then 45, surrounded always by the family that had grown from their union. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1923, the entire Harrison family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, extended family and friends, nearly 100 people came to honor the couple who had built such a legacy of love. Flynn and Penelope, both in their 70s now but still sharp and engaged with life, stood before the assembled crowd and renewed their vows. Their voices were not as strong as they had been 50 years earlier, but the words carried the weight of half a century of shared life. "I, Flynn, take you, Penelope, to be my wife," Flynn said, his eyes locked on hers just as they had been at their first wedding. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Penelope, take you, Flynn, to be my husband," Penelope echoed, tears streaming freely down her lined face. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." They kissed to thunderous applause, and someone started singing for their jolly good fellows, and the celebration went on late into the night. Later, when most of the family had finally left or found places to sleep around the property, Flynn and Penelope sat on their porch one more time, holding hands and looking out over the ranch bathed in moonlight. 50 years, Penelope said wonderingly. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Flynn admitted. "It feels like just yesterday we were young and starting out, and simultaneously like we have been together forever." "I wish we could have another 50, Penelope said wistfully. Flynn squeezed her hand gently. "We will have whatever time we are given, and we will make the most of it, just like we always have. Promise me something," Penelope said suddenly. "Anything. Promise me that you know how much I love you, that you understand you were the making of me, Flynn. You took a foolish, prideful girl and loved her into becoming a woman worthy of that love. Everything good in my life came from you." "Penelope," Flynn said gently, turning to cup her face in his weathered hands, "you give me too much credit. You were always worthy. You just needed the chance to see it yourself. And as for being the making of you, well, You were the making of me, too. I was just a lonely rancher with a broken heart before you came back into my life. You gave me purpose and family and more joy than any man deserves." "We made each other then," Penelope said, smiling through her tears. "Yes," Flynn agreed. "We made each other and we made this." He gestured at the ranch, the house, the tangible evidence of their 50 years together. Not bad for a desperate woman on a doorstep and the cowboy who could not turn her away. Penelope laughed at that, remembering. "You said I never had to beg here." "And you never did," Flynn replied. "Not then, not ever. Everything I had was yours from the moment you walked through that door." They sat together in the moonlight, two people who had weathered 50 years of life together and come through stronger for it. They had built a family, a legacy, a love that would outlast them both in the hearts of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Eventually, the night grew cold, and they went inside to the bedroom they had shared for 5 decades. They helped each other prepare for bed with the ease of long practice, Flynn unfastening the buttons Penelope could no longer reach, Penelope helping Flynn with his boots. In bed, they curled together as they had every night for 50 years, Flynn's arms around Penelope, her head on his shoulder. "I love you," Penelope whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Flynn replied. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep together, content and complete, two hearts that had found their way home to each other against all odds and stayed true through everything life had thrown at them. In the years that followed, they continued their life together, slowing down but never stopping completely. Flynn still walked the property every morning, checking on things even though James managed everything now. Penelope still tended her small garden and cooked Sunday dinners for whichever family members could make it home. They celebrated their 51st anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their children. Their 52nd with a slightly larger gathering. Their 53rd with great-great-grandchildren running around the ranch, a new generation to carry forward the legacy they had built. Flynn passed away peacefully in his sleep in early 1926, 3 months after their 54th anniversary. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Penelope woke that morning to find him still beside her, his hand in hers, a peaceful expression on his face. The grief was profound, losing the man who had been her partner for more than half a century. But along with the grief was gratitude for every moment they had shared, every challenge they had overcome together, every joy they had celebrated. At Flynn's funeral, the church in Florissant was packed with family and friends, people whose lives had been touched by his kindness and integrity. Penelope sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, wearing the locket Flynn had given her 45 years earlier. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said simply when asked to speak. "He taught me what real love looked like. He showed me that kindness and hard work and commitment could build something that lasts forever. I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." Penelope lived another 3 years after Flynn's death, staying on the ranch that had been her home for more than 40 years. Her children wanted her to move into town or come live with one of them, but she refused. "This is where I belong," she said firmly. "This is where Flynn and I built our life together. I will stay here until I join him." She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days to her great-grandchildren, passing on the wisdom she had gained through a life well lived. She never took off the locket Flynn had given her, and often she would sit on the porch in her favorite chair, with Flynn's empty chair beside her, talking to him as if he were still there. On a warm August evening in 1929, Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset just as she had done thousands of times before with Flynn. The sky was particularly beautiful that night, streaked with gold and crimson and purple. Beautiful, "Is it not?" she said softly to the empty chair beside her. "Just like you always loved." She felt tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from a life fully lived. She thought about that desperate day 46 years ago when she had stood on Flynn's doorstep, swallowing her pride and begging for help. She thought about his words, "You never have to beg here." Those simple words had changed everything. They had opened the door not just to shelter, but to love and family and a life beyond her wildest dreams. Flynn had given her everything, not because she deserved it, but because that was who he was, a man who saw someone in need and helped without expecting anything in return. And she had loved him for it, every single day since. As the sun dipped below the mountains one final time, Penelope closed her eyes and smiled. She could almost feel Flynn's hand in hers, almost hear his voice saying her name. She drifted off peacefully, and when her daughter Margaret came to check on her an hour later, she found her mother slumped in her chair, the locket clasped in one hand, a serene expression on her face. Penelope Porter Harrison was buried beside her husband in the fluorescent cemetery, their headstones side by side, their names and dates etched in granite. But their real legacy lived on in the descendants who filled the ranch house with laughter, in the stories passed down through generations, in the example of their enduring love. The ranch itself stayed in the Harrison family, passed from James to his children and on down the line. The house Flynn had built and expanded over the years still stood, sheltering new generations. The porch where Flynn and Penelope had spent countless evenings remained, the two chairs still positioned to watch the sunset over the mountains. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, the current residents of the ranch would swear they could see two figures sitting on that porch, holding hands and watching the sky together, eternal in their love. The story of Penelope and Flynn became part of fluorescent lore, told and retold at family gatherings and community events. The tale of the proud woman who had swallowed her pride, the cowboy who had taken her in with simple kindness, and the beautiful life they had built together from that humble beginning. It was a reminder that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that second chances were worth taking, and that sometimes the best things in life came from opening your door and your heart to someone in need. Because as Flynn had said that very first day, some things were more important than pride or past mistakes. Kindness mattered, compassion mattered, and love, real love that was built on friendship and respect and shared labor, could withstand anything life threw at it. Their story ended, but their love lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the example they had set for all who knew them. And perhaps that is the best legacy anyone could hope for, to be remembered not just for what they accomplished, but for how they loved.